All right, welcome everyone to a new episode of the Roscoe's Wetsuit podcast. I am your host, Toby Passman. On the show today, I have a very special guest, Dr. Gerald Pollack. Dr. Pollack is a scientist recognized worldwide as a dynamic speaker and author whose passion lies in plumbing the depths of natural truths. He received the first Emoto Peace Prize and is a recipient of the University of Washington's highest honor, the annual Faculty Lecturer Award. He is founding editor-in-chief of the research journal Water and director of the Institute for Venture Science. Dr. Pollack's award-winning books include The Fourth Phase of Water and Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life. Dr. Pollack, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, my pleasure, Toby. Good to be with you. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. I think, what would be interesting to start off with is, you've kind of based a lot of your research on something called EZ Water. And if you could just kind of break that down for the listener, if people haven't heard of that, what is EZ Water and why should we care about it?
Well, okay, I'll address the second question before the first one. You should care about it because it's the kind of water that fills your body. And since it fills your body and participates in virtually everything that your cells do inside your body, you should be curious about it, or at least be learn something about this. So, what is EZ water? Well, EZ stands for exclusion zone, and we coined the term EZ. It was a suggestion from a colleague in Australia because it's easy to remember, but it stands actually. It doesn't work in Europe because in Europe it's EZ, not EZ, and in most other countries too. So the advantage in the term EZ is conferred pretty much exclusively to Americans who use the term Z instead of Z. So easy to remember. So it stands for exclusion zone. And what do we mean by exclusion zone? When we first discovered this water some years ago, we discovered it because it was a zone in water that actually excludes particles and solutes. Usually if you put some stuff in water, it spreads all over the place. And we noticed under certain conditions that there was a region of water that tended to exclude, especially these tiny little particles called microspheres. That is, little spheres. This is commonly used in scientific research. And at first, we took a gel made of water, a hydrogel, not so different from Jello, something like that, but it wasn't that. It was polyvinyl alcohol gel, and we put it we put it in a chamber and dumped some water in it, and we put these little tiny spheres into the water, and we noticed that right next to the gel, the microspheres were excluded. And this zone at which the microspheres were excluded kept growing over time. And it reached typically a few hundred micrometers, that's maybe a third of a millimeter, big enough that you could actually see it with your naked eye, but we used a microscope. And we called it the exclusion zone because that's the first property that we found. But after a few years, we performed a lot more experiments, and we found a lot more. And we found that this region that was next to the gel and next to actually many other different substances that we tried later is different from ordinary water. So in ordinary water, the molecules are bouncing around at a huge number of times per second, and they're randomly oriented. But in this kind of water, we found the molecules are organized. The water molecules are, in a way, kind of lined up, ordered, structured. People have used different terms to describe this, and we studied it. And over the years, we found some pretty interesting characteristics. The first characteristic, I already mentioned, it excludes substances profoundly. The second one is that, unlike ordinary water, which is not charged, this is charged. It has typically has a net negative charge, and the corresponding positive charge lies in the region beyond this exclusion zone. So it's like a battery. You got negative in one place and positive in another place. And if you were to connect these two areas to a load of some sort, like a lamp or something, it'll light the lamp because it acts like an ordinary battery. And the second is you don't get energy from nothing. The energy has first to be input, and then you get it out. So it's like the battery that's inside your cell phone. I think I'm almost the only person on the face of the earth who doesn't own one um, for various reasons. But you can actually extract that electrical energy. But so for your cell phone, it doesn't work unless you recharge the battery. And it's the same with this battery. It requires energy for recharging. And so where does this energy come from? It actually, we found, comes from light. And we checked wavelengths of light, even beyond the visible spectrum. We started with ultraviolet, and then violet, blue, and throughout the spectrum, and then infrared. And we found that all of the wavelengths are somewhat effective, but far more effective than any of the visible or UV wavelengths is infrared, particularly at a wavelength of 3 micrometers, which is actually the wavelength that water likes to absorb the most. So we found that the energy that water likes to absorb is then converted into buildup of the EZ. It makes it bigger. You put in more infrared light, and the exclusion zone expands. So it's a battery, you might say, and the battery is recharged by infrared light. And the infrared is all around us. Many people are not so familiar with where infrared light comes from. I say infrared light. People would call it infrared energy, but it's the same thing. And you know that it's coming from, say, a toaster or electric oven. You look and you feel the heat and you see the glowing coils, and everybody knows that it's generating infrared energy. But in fact, infrared energy is more prevalent than you might guess from what I've just said. It's all over the place, and you can document that yourself if you have an infrared camera. So if you darken your room where you're sitting now, I see that the drapes are drawn. It's pretty dark inside if you turn off the lights, I presume. You won't be able to see anything, and if you whip out your camera, your mobile phone camera, you won't be able to get an image. But if you had a camera whose sensor is sensitive to infrared wavelengths, then you get a beautiful image. So it's used as these infrared cameras they're used basically to see in the dark, and they're used a lot in military applications. So
what about with infrared saunas? Is that one of the ways in which they work, is by kind of building up EZ water in the cells?
totally, you hit it right on. At least that's our hypothesis, because so step one is that your cells are filled with this kind of water, with EZ water, and step two is that in many pathologies you don't have enough of this water inside your cell. So if you don't have enough, you got a pathology. Your cells are not functioning well, and that could be manifested in any organ in your body. It could be a headache that you have, it could be you're feeling tired, it could be your muscle is aching, or just basically anything. And what you need to reverse that is a buildup of this kind of water, at least to reverse it temporarily, and in some cases perhaps over the long term. So you go into a sauna, and and you feel the heat, and that heat is basically infrared energy that's coming at you. And if you're not wearing any clothing, it will be absorbed everywhere in your body, even through clothing. Some of the wavelengths will get through. And so you walk into the sauna and you feel you're feeling miserable. You've got a headache, and I can remember an instance in Finland about 5-6 years ago, and I'd given a talk that day. And in the evening was a party, and the party was very nice with food and goodwill and such. And by the time 10 p.m. came, I'd had it. All I wanted to do was go back to my hotel and go to sleep. And so finally, some guy stands up there with his microphone and says, and I thought for sure he's going to say, well, the buses are loading, time to get on. Instead, he didn't say that. He said, okay, the saunas are now open. We have a wet one, we have a dry one. There were 3 or 4 different ones that you could go to. And so everybody went, and I said, oh, well, okay, even though I'm dead to the world, I'll go. Well, 20 or 30 minutes later, it felt like I'd had 8 hours sleep. It's the morning, and I can do just anything. And the difference between the two states of being was so dramatic that I couldn't believe the difference. And I also enjoyed some in Russia. They call it banya over there instead of sauna, as they do in Finland. But the result is the same. I think it's true for most people. Most people go in and they feel better in one way or another when they come out. And the reason, it would be my hypothesis, I don't have proof of this, but it follows from all the experiments we've done that when you're exposed to infrared energy, since infrared energy builds EZ water, in your body, EZ water is built, and especially in those cells where it's particularly deficient, you get more EZ water. So that works very well. So I think you put your finger on it. I think that is the reason why, or at least one of the reasons for sure, why saunas are really good for health. And that's
Right.
also why various people have their own infrared lamp, infrared sauna, because it does the trick. So yeah,
Sure.
thanks for mentioning that. That's
Yeah. And
important.
now that we're just on the topic of light, I'm curious, does the sun have an effect on EZ water?
Well, um, I think the answer is yes. I don't have direct proof of that, but you know, when you think about the sun's the wavelengths that come from the sun, 50% of those wavelengths that reach the earth are in the infrared wavelength region, you know, beyond the visible light. So when you walk into the sun, you feel light and you feel heat, right? You sense light, you feel heat, and that heat comes from the infrared energy. And so in theory, if you put some water in the sun, it ought to build EZ water. We've never expressly done that experiment, mostly for logistical reasons. You know, in Seattle, especially in the wintertime, we don't get much sun. If I look out right now, it's gray, and gray is typical. And that's why a lot of people, they move to Seattle, and some of them don't make it. They got to move away from Seattle. A good friend just did that because of the gloom. And some people get depressed because of the gloom. So it's a little hard to go out, you know, and plan your experiment to go out in the sun when the sun is not so often there. So we haven't done exactly that experiment, but you know, we really ought to. And you just reminded me that in the summertime, maybe we're going to do that. In
Right.
theory, the sun should have a powerful effect. And that's also why sometimes when the sun does break through, people go outside, they feel good. You know, everybody thinks, well, it's some deep psychological reason that we need to see more light and therefore we feel better. It might be true, but it also might be a direct effect of the sunlight. We absorb the infrared wavelengths, they build EZ water, and therefore our cells are functioning better and we feel better. It might well be true.
Right, right. So it could be a variety of reasons, but
It could be, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But
Certainly if
yeah, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say certainly an effect, moving I'm did what you're talking about, moving from Seattle to Florida, and for sure noticing, just the first week I was here, just noticing, I mean, all the changes as far as my mood and just overall well-being, increasing a lot.
Is that
And
right?
I was Yeah,
Oh,
oh yeah. And I was just curious, if that was to some degree due to, an effect of easy water. It sounds like it's possible.
it is absolutely possible. I think, Toby, that many people seriously underestimate the importance of water in the body. If you read a typical book on cell biology or biochemistry, you'll find water in the index, but very few entries. Uh, to people who learn, shall we say, conventional biochemistry, biophysics, cell biology, water is nothing more than the background carrier of the more important molecules of life. It doesn't do anything. It's like the bathtub full of water, and you dump in the DNA and the proteins, and everything works just fine.
Why
And
do you think it's been overlooked like that?
uh, because um, because of several debacles that took place in the science of water. I can tell you about those, but first I summarize. Things seem to have gone wrong with several experiments that were done by prominent people, and after that happened, a lot of scientists got scared of dipping their toe into the water, so to speak. Um, and Well, water used to be a topic of scientific discussion. It ceased to be that way in pretty much the last half of the previous century. Scientists were scared because if prominent scientists would apparently, parenthesis, screw up so badly, then scientists who are mere mortals daren't um, go into the studies of water because it could be treacherous. It could ruin your career. So people stayed away from it. Because people stayed away from it, not much work was done after that. People were aware of these debacles, and they would use it as um, kind of scientific jokes. Oh, you're studying water, yeah, good luck to you. See if your career is ruined. And because of that, the research was stymied. Well, we have a conference that I organize each year. It's in Europe. Last year was in Germany. It attracted 180 people, and there were multiple presentations about really interesting characteristics of water. Now that in the late uh, 1900s or so, that didn't happen. There was almost nothing about water, and so when the textbooks are written, there's not much to say. Were written. Was not much to say about water. The textbooks now have not caught on, not yet, and one of the reasons for that is the publishers of the textbooks. Uh, they're inclined to have their books be profitable for the company. And if somebody writes a textbook and presents a paradigm that differs grossly from the accepted paradigm, they're not going to sell many books because the university will say, well, we have to teach the standard stuff. We want our students to succeed. If they learn this kind of interesting but a revolutionary type of understanding or paradigm, they won't pass the exams and our students will suffer and our university will suffer. And so we don't want to buy that book. And the publishers know that, so they're going to be reluctant to publish a book on biochemistry or cell biology that takes, you might say, revolutionary point of view. So it takes time. It takes a lot of time for this to happen. I'm sanguine that this will happen eventually, but it's not happening yet. Although a lot of people have become interested in easy water, or sometimes we call it the fourth phase of water. I'll tell you, I don't know how much time we have, but if you want, I can tell you a little bit about these two incidents that took place about water. Okay, so
Sure.
yeah, well, the first one that took place is with a Russian guy named Boris Deryagin, and Boris Deryagin was the premier physical chemist in all of Russia. This was in the 1960s or so, and people respected him. And Russia has many great physical chemists, but this was the top physical chemist in the whole country. And someone came to him with an observation, which he then took up and worked on for a few years. And he found that there was a kind of water that differed from ordinary water. Um, and it had a much lower freezing point, hard to freeze, hard to vaporize, had a different kind of absorption of light, absorption spectra, different density. Everything about this kind of water seemed different. And and he thought it was pure water because what he did was he took a glass capillary tube and he put it into a device that where the water was evaporating and the water condensed in this capillary tube and it filled this glass capillary tube. And he began to see kinds of streaks in the along the tube in the water, and that's what he had examined. And pretty soon in the West, it became fashionable or popular to translate some of the work from Russian into English. And that happened, if I believe, in the mid-1960s or so, because people in the West began to realize that the Russians were pretty good at science. In fact, in my view, outstanding in science, very open-minded and clever. And so it came to being that the West became aware of Deryagin's finding of a different kind of water with different properties from ordinary water. And a lot of people thought this was exciting because, you know, everybody thinks there are three phases of water: solid, liquid, and vapor. And we think we understand the liquid water very well, but this guy was finding something that was different and seemingly revolutionary. So,
I'm
uh,
just
yeah,
I'm
go
just
ahead.
curious. I mean, that's something that, I, along with probably most people, I'm assuming still today, are taught, the water has three phases. Is that something that, I mean, even though it's not true, that you've proven that, is that something that it's still sort of not an idea that's being accepted, at least in the Western world?
Oh yeah, well, yeah, yes and no. So there are various people, various chemists and physicists who have been critical of our work and what we found. Um, I don't agree with their criticism for some very simple reasons, but um, you'll find them on the internet. You'll find some stuff about EZ water, fourth phase water that's critical. Um, in some cases, I've actually responded formally in writing. In other cases, it's just so difficult to focus on responding to everything that appears, and we spend most of our time doing experiments to create new knowledge. On the other hand, there are many people out there who have read my book, Fourth Phase of Water, where all of this appears. Um, by the way, the book has become really popular, and it's got high ratings on Amazon. And
Highly recommend it. Yeah, I really
you
enjoyed
recommend?
it.
Thank you. Yeah, Fourth Phase of Water. It's been translated now into multiple languages, even an audiobook. Uh, I couldn't imagine how you could come forth with an audiobook because the pictures really tell the words, but I guess they give out some printed document with the audiobook, so it lets you look at the pictures while you're listening to it. I guess that seems to work. I've gotten some positive feedback on it. But of course, the print book is the nicest one. Anyway, where was I going? Yeah.
Well,
And
I
so, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, speaking of experiments with the easy water, I was curious because when we met and talked before, you were telling me about sort of some of the experiments you were doing with, I believe it was the brain octane oil and butter or ghee
Yeah, yeah,
with Dave Asprey.
yeah.
Were those did you guys finish those experiments, or any results from those?
Oh, absolutely. And we submitted a paper for publication, and I'm hopeful that within the next week or two, it's under serious revision. We re-revised, and it should be very close to, I think, to acceptance. Yeah, and we found that next to next to ghee and next to various other fats, we find a very big EZs. Um, More than we ever expected. They could be up to almost a millimeter in size. It was completely unexpected because you expect that typically that fats are not going to do anything, and fats have been maligned for many years as being well, not good for your health, but in fact um, the opinion has changed somewhat over the past few years, and now people are beginning to recognize that fats.
Just as far as we were talking about, sort of, with fats, and
Yeah,
that was one of the things was interesting. I mean, following kind of Dave Asprey's work with Bulletproof and his popularization of Bulletproof Coffee, it's something that, there's been various kind of claims that have been made about it, but now it's cool that there's some hard kind of scientific data that can kind of explain how it works in part.
well, I believe you're exactly right in that we found huge exclusion zones, and it goes along with the increasingly common belief that fats are good for you. So we think that anything that builds EZ is going to be good for you, because that EZ water is something that is absolutely critical to all function inside the body. And the evidence for that was presented in my 2001 book, Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life. Um, uh, so, so yeah, it kind of closes the loop a bit on the value of fats, at least some fats. These are the fats with medium chain fatty acids. Not all fats will behave the same way, but these do. And
Right.
so,
And
so
can
we're
you just
excited about that. Yeah.
yeah, can you just explain a little more, like what the experiment actually was, and then how you were able to measure that increase in easy water?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is to build a solid of some sort, and out of, say, ghee. And so we took ghee and we put it into some cylindrical kind of container and put it in the fridge, low temperature. And when you release, you get a cylinder that's actually a solid when you take it out of the fridge. And it's a solid for some length of time. And then put this in water, cold water, with these particles, with these microspheres. And you look in the microscope, you don't even need a microscope, just look and you can see this microsphere-free region building from the surface of the ghee into the water. And it builds and builds and builds over a period of 5-10 minutes, and it stops. Then you have a fully grown exclusion zone. And um, and that's the way we do it. It's actually a pretty simple experiment. It's just that you need the right apparatus to put together to make sure that it's working properly. And we tried various other fats, and we also found in many of them, including lard, um, and a few others, that we could get exclusion zones very nicely from a whole bunch of those. So
Which
yeah,
fat?
that's what.
I was
So
just sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to ask which fat was able to generate the greatest exclusion zones?
ghee,
Ghee.
yeah,
Ah,
and as you know, ghee is considered in the Ayurvedic culture, and still stay in India, to be good for health, and so they use it all the time. Maybe that's why many of the Indians are as healthy as they are. I'm not sure. At least the ones that have food to eat. So yeah,
right. And then you guys found so the same thing as far as the MCT oil or one of the derivatives. I guess you guys were testing the specific the C8, the brain octane oil.
We tried that too, and that was a little more difficult to deal with because we couldn't convert it into a solid easily. But we could actually lay it on a surface, lay that oil on the surface, and above that surface, we could detect with the microscope. We could detect an EZ, a region that was microsphere free. So we could test that too, and that was effective.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to the publication of the paper. As I said, the final one was submitted a few days ago, and we're hopeful that everything will be okay.
Yeah, yeah, no, when that comes out, please do send me a link and I can put it in like the show notes
Oh,
so
okay,
people
sure,
can, yeah, take a look at it. But yeah, that'll be really cool. Um,
sure.
I wanted to ask you, uh, just from your discussion of easy water and how kind of the lack of easy water can lead to, a whole host of different kind of dysfunctions and disease. It seems like, mitochondrial function is something that has really, kind of hit the mainstream, over the last, maybe 5 years or so,
Yeah,
as far as kind of damaged mitochondria leading to a whole host of different disorders and ways to increase mitochondrial functioning, being good for health overall. Is there any sort of link between the mitochondria and easy water production?
I think there's a direct link between mitochondria and EZ water production. I think mitochondria build EZ water. So if you look at the structure of the mitochondrion, it's got these membranes that stick into that organelle. Um, and these membranes are exactly the kinds of structures next to which EZ water builds. So given all the electrical aspects of the mitochondria, the electrical potential and such, and structure, we think that inside the mitochondria, EZ water is built. And that EZ water can either contribute to the EZ water inside the cell, or the charge in that EZ, the negative charge, could permeate. That's easier to do, permeate the mitochondrion and go into the cell. And we know that negative charge builds EZ water. So what I'm getting to in this sort of complicated statement is to say that some of the energy of the cell comes from the electrical potential of EZ water, and the mitochondria might actually produce EZ water to help construct the necessary EZ water inside the rest of the cell.
Interesting. So this is a theory at this point. Is there research or is there research being done to see if the mitochondria are actually or if easy water is actually being generated by the mitochondria?
Well, we've been thinking about that. We haven't done any. We're trying to think of how to test that.
Ah,
It's not so obvious how to do it, but if you have any good idea, we'd like to hear from you. To see that there's easy water inside the mitochondrion. Um, um, it's not so obvious how to test that. We can do it in indirect ways, but we'd like something that's more direct. It seems designed, so to speak, just to create that sort of buildup of easy water. And it might be, Toby, that much of the energy from the cell is actually coming from easy water. Um, so we all think that um, the energy comes from the splitting of ATP, a high energy bond, and that's certainly possible, maybe even likely. However, let me give you a caveat on that. Um, uh, so that's an old idea. I think about 70 or 80 years old. That energy comes from the high energy bond, and everybody's accepted it. Just about, maybe more than any other feature of all science. Everybody knows that the energy comes from ATP splitting. However, 1 year after the paper on that revealed a high energy bond. One year after it came out, another paper came out by a physical chemist said these guys screwed up because they made an arithmetic error. They didn't use the right number in a certain place. And in fact, there is no high energy bond in ATP. Nobody, according to Gilbert Ling, who is probably the guy most responsible for the idea that the water inside the cell is structured or ordered in some way, a hero of mine, now 100 years old, just this year, 100. He mentions this not only in his books, but also his website, which is gilbertling.org, easy to get to. And he'll cite the references and tell you that it's not so clear that the evidence that that we use ATP to gain all or even maybe some of our energy, that is necessarily correct. So I don't know the answer. I don't know who's right, who's wrong. One has to delve in very deeply, the original paper and the one that came after that, to make judgment as to who's right and who's not right. But the odd thing is that except for Gilbert Ling, nobody has ever, to his knowledge and to my knowledge, commented on that paper that came out challenging that point of view. So now it's in every textbook, and once it's in textbooks for 2 or 3 generations, it's fact. So another possibility is that some or much, I hesitate to say all, but much of the energy is actually coming from the battery that I mentioned earlier, that the fact that you've inside the cell, that you have a lot of negative charge. In fact, let me say parenthetically, people who study cell biology know that the reason the inside of the cell is negatively charged compared to the outside by 50 to 100 millivolts has to do with pumps and channels in the membrane. I think that's wrong. I wrote a paper on that, which appeared 3 or 4 years ago in the literature. And maybe it's too much to go into now because maybe it's too much of a detail. But another possibility to explain why when people stick electrodes into cells, they get negative electrical potential is because the EZ water has negative charge. So if you fill the cell with stuff that has negative charge and you stick an electrode in, you're going to be measuring negative charge. It's a very simple kind of explanation. And therefore, it's possible that this negative charge, this represents potential energy, because all those negative charges would like to get away from each other as much as possible because they repel, but they can't because you've got a cell membrane and such. So question is whether really it's these pumps and channels in the membrane, or and one of Gilbert Ling's arguments against these membrane pumps is they require far too much energy. The cell can't possibly have enough energy to power these pumps. And when he came to that conclusion about 40 years ago, there was only one pump that was known. And now there are many pumps or transporters. They all need energy because pumps require energy. And he found experimentally it was impossible. So, and the other observation, or another observation, is you can take a gel, no membrane, but it exhibits the same features, negative electrical potential. You stick the same electrode in the gel without a membrane as you stick in the cell with a membrane, and you get the same electrical potential. So if it's really true that the electrical potential inside the cell comes from the membrane, but you got something else without the membrane that gives you the same result, it's hard to maintain that it's the membrane that does it. I just meant this as a parenthetical argument, but Gilbert Ling is definitely worth reading. Some of his stuff is a little hard to penetrate, but he has come up with a lot of ideas that I believe are sound. But so I'm circumventing the question a little bit about energy. It's possible that all of the energy, I would hesitate to say all, most of the energy, some of the energy we don't know how much comes from this battery, from this condensation of charge. Charges want to get away from each other. They have potential energy, and that's the energy that leads to the folding of proteins, which is really the work of the cell. When the protein goes from this state to this state, it folds, and the action, the cell goes into action. When it goes into action, this is what causes the action. The folding of the protein. So in a muscle cell, for example, actin and myosin proteins would fold, and that would build up tension and cause contraction. In a nerve cell, folding of proteins in one way or another is responsible for the transmission of information. In a secretory cell, folding of protein is responsible for the secretion that occurs in the cell. So, but this folding of protein, the normal state is that surrounding this protein is a lot of EZ water. The cell is packed with it. But if you don't have enough EZ water, then the cell is in a strange environment. And instead of folding, it misfolds or doesn't fold or stays folded or something like this. And therefore you have a pathology. Your muscle isn't working well, your nerve is not doing what it should be doing, et cetera, et cetera. So the energy for this protein folding could come from this concentration of negative charge that sits there and wants to become neutral if it can. That's what's responsible, at least in part, for the powering of the cell and for our body, I believe.
Okay. And what specifically can you tell me about brain cells, neurons, and EZ Water? Has there been any work as far as looking at different psychiatric or neurological disorders and how EZ Water is interacting with those, or?
None that I can think of offhand, but a whole bunch of neurologists and neurophysiologists are beginning to look at that possibility, because the brain, of course, full of nerves, but it's full of water. I think the brain is 70 or 80% water, more than most other organs is filled with water. And from our experiments, we can project that almost all of that water will be EZ water. And so if chronically, if you don't have enough in some of your cells, you're having issues. You would be having headaches or other neurological impairments. So this is right now only speculation, but I'm convinced that that there's going to be a profound linkage between water and brain activities. In fact, there are some people who your viewers may seem far out, but we're thinking that the water itself inside your brain is actually a repository for information. And I don't know if you yourself have gotten into the idea of information storage in water. Have you ever heard about that? Or
Not too much, no.
no? Well, this is now getting to be a big deal. So a lot of people are getting interested in that, in the possibility that water could store information. So experimentally, people have been demonstrating this, and in the conferences that we organize every year, I mentioned last year in Germany, and probably in Germany this coming year, or Italy. Usually there are 3 or 4 presentations that demonstrate in one way or another that the water can store information, and we have experiments that are beginning to show that as well. So what I mean to say is that lots of people are getting interested in the subject because it's a kind of frontier subject that people couldn't imagine possible. But now with EZ Water, it seems possible, because EZ Water is, the molecules are organized in a regular 3-dimensional array, just like computer memory. And we know that the oxygen molecules in that array have different possible states. So in a normal computer memory, there are 2 states equivalent to a 0 and a 1. in this case, the oxygens actually have 5 different so-called oxidation states. Typically is -2, and then there's -1 and 0, even +1 and +2. So in theory, every or any one of the oxygen molecules in that 3-dimensional array of EZ water could take on up to 5 different states. And if you do the calculation, if that's really true, you can calculate that the advantage in this kind of memory over standard computer memory is like 6 or 7 or 8 orders of magnitude. It's huge, huge difference. In other words, the water that, at least in theory, the water that's inside our brain or inside any cell has the capacity, huge capacity for information storage. And then the logical question is, well, gee, that's fine, but where is the evidence for this? Well, I'll just give you one piece of evidence. There's a guy in Germany who is studying. His name is Kernbach, and he's studying water. Put some water. He's done the experiment of putting water on his laboratory bench, and then asking people from some distance to focus their attention on the water. And after they do, even from as far as 10,000 kilometers away, 10,000 kilometers, his lab is in Germany, and I think it was New Zealand. And at an appointed time, and the guy focused his intention on the water from 10,000 miles away, and he shows that about the technique that he uses to measure the physical properties of water changes dramatically
Wow.
about 30 minutes. And I think he's published a paper. I haven't seen it yet, but he's been presenting at our conference. And then even more famous experiment by Luc Montagnier. He won the Nobel Prize. He comes to our conference every year, or has been coming. I hope he keeps coming. And he demonstrated something really remarkable about water memory. He got his Nobel Prize discovering HIV, but then he changed fields. And after the late Jacques Benveniste died, he was actually probably the first one to talk about water memory. Luc Montagnier began to continue his kinds of experiments, and what he showed is just absolutely remarkable. So I'll just tell you briefly. He takes 2 containers, sealed, and puts them next to each other. In one container, there's DNA, a short strand of DNA. And the next container sitting next to it is water. Just these 2 sitting right next to each other, perfectly sealed, so there can be no chemical communication. He adds a little bit of energy, like 60 hertz or 50 hertz or something like that, to give the system energy. Then after a day, these 2 have been sitting next to each other. He hypothesizes that the DNA is radiating information that's absorbed by the water. See, so then he tests this. He throws away the DNA. He tests this by taking the water and using it to build new DNA, using reactions called PCR. Maybe you know or don't know about it. Yeah, it amplifies DNA. So you take the water and you mix it with the chemicals, and you get new DNA. And the sequence of that new DNA matches the sequence of the DNA that had been sitting near the water.
Huh.
Remarkable, absolutely. And according to Luke, it's been confirmed by several other, I think, Italian groups. So this is totally remarkable, if it's true, and we're led to believe that it's true.
Right.
It's
Especially
yeah.
coming from a guy who's won the Nobel Prize, certainly
Yeah, you'd
has
expect
something
that.
to say. Yeah.
He has some credibility.
Yeah.
Of course, it's very controversial, as you might guess, because there's a tendency for scientists, in theory, open-minded scientists, for scientists to reject what they don't understand. So if someone says that water can store information, you get a blank face. They don't want to hear anything more about evidence, because it's it's impossible. Therefore, I don't even want to listen to what you have to say. Uh, However, there's evidence that is beginning to pile up that all points to the possibility that information could be stored in the water. And I'll go way out on a limb on this one. Our brains are filled with water.
Hmm.
And if the water can store information, then it's possible that some of the information that's stored in our brain is actually stored in the water in the brain. If you think about how much information is stored in our brain, and according to some people beyond our brain, like someone like Rupert Sheldrake, who says that the mind is bigger than the brain. There's information all out there. And he has reasonable evidence for that. It's hard to understand, even for him, to figure out what's going on, but it may be there. And so it's possible. If you think of the information that you have in your brain, imagine all the images that you have stored, and you know how much space that takes up in your digital computer. And if the information unit is one cell or one neuron, that places huge limits on the amount of information that you could be stored. But if the limiting factor is the size of the water molecule, you have a gazillion water molecules inside of each nerve cell, then you have a huge capacity, much larger capacity. And going way out on a limb and talking again about coming back to Rupert Sheldrake, if the information that's stored can be radiated out, just as Luc Montagnier has shown, then there could be a possible basis for information even outside our brain to somehow communicate with what's inside of our brain. So all of this is highly speculative. On the other hand, science is no fun without some kinds of speculation. Just merely crossing the T's and dotting the I's will get you perhaps incrementally ahead, but we need revolutions. And some of this stuff is revolutionary. It may turn out to be dead wrong, but if it's right, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it should be fascinating to see what the research ends up bearing out.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah, totally.
so, and just to kind of flesh out this idea of the kind of water storing information, could this be sort of, any sort of memory, whether that be, past memory or dream or emotion? Is that kind of the idea that anything kind of related to brain function could be sort of stored in the water?
It could be. And, emotional traumas, something you
Uh-huh.
suffered from at an early age, could be firmly embedded and not so easy to get out. So
Interesting. Yeah,
all
that
of that
could.
is possible. There's so many ramifications, and you can speculate about them. But the goal now is to try to figure out about the nature of water memory. We know it exists because people have done experiments. We've also done experiments. These are preliminary experiments, but they're very simple. We take a container of water and put it on the laboratory bench, and we have people put their hands around it and focus a positive intention on the water for 5 or 10 minutes. And then we measure the water before and after. And so far, consistently, we have only 5 or 6 subjects, but consistently there's a shift in the this is a technique. It's called UV vis spectroscopy. It measures the absorption of light at different wavelengths in the UV invisible range, and there's a definite shift that occurs before and after versus after the intention has been applied to the water. It's preliminary. I have to emphasize that we haven't done yet all the proper controls, but we're working on that right now.
I'm
So
curious, have you read The Biology of Belief? I believe Bruce Lipton.
no, I've been wanting to do that, but
That's the first thing that came to my mind when you're talking about these sort of experiments. It seemed like, I mean, before I read that book, I wouldn't believe you. I mean, it sounds so outlandish, but in that book, it's like talking about similar things. So it makes sense that, there might be
oh
something
yeah,
to this.
And that's why somebody who's local on, I think it was Bainbridge Island, invited me to meet Bruce Lipton. We've never met, but I know about his work, and I think he may know about our work. But I was in Japan at the time, so it failed. But
Interesting.
I know that his work is impactful, and thank you for leading me in that direction. So
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, it's been several years since I read the book, but I think like the main thing it was measuring was heart rate variability and how that can sort of fluctuate based on, you know, the intention that people are giving it. So that's another kind of interesting research thing down the road is whether kind of heart rate variability changes the
yeah.
complexion of easy water or vice versa too.
Or yeah, as a reflection of some facet of easy water.
Right.
I give you another example that was kind of amusing. It has to do with a 3-star Michelin chef who I had the good fortune of meeting. His name is Heston Blumenthal, and he runs a restaurant called the Fat Duck in near London, and it was voted by whom I'm not sure, best restaurant in the world. So this is so we had I met him at his home. He now lives in the south of France. I went with my late wife, and we spent the full day there overnight, slept over, and we became friends. And I met him again. Uh, a couple of months ago at our water conference, and he couldn't wait to tell me his idea. And his idea was to organize a symposium together. He'll invite 6 of the best chefs in the world, and I'll invite scientists dealing with water, and the topic will be the role of water in food and cooking. So this is very
Wow.
exciting.
It'd be
But
fascinating.
meanwhile, yeah, so we had this meeting over, it was very nice, over a dinner, at a local restaurant. I figured he'd choose the best one. It was pretty good. Everybody recognized him. You know, chefs, especially 3-star Michelin chefs, are celebrities in Europe. Here, much less so. But so he poured some wine, and he said to me, he said, "Well, before you drink it," he said, I want you to spend 1 minute thinking of the person you absolutely hate. You just can't stand to be in the same room with that person, right? And focus your intention on that person." So I did that. I could think of not too many people, but I thought of one who I found somewhat distasteful, and then taste the wine. So I tasted the wine. And now I want you to think about a person you absolutely love, you'd like to have right next to you all the time, and is a wonderful person. I did that too, and then drink it. And the tastes were distinctly different, clearly different. And I think the point that he was making is this is not water, but wine, of course, does contain water in addition to the alcohol. Um, and by the way, also we found that ethyl alcohol shares many of the same properties as water. That's an interesting
Hmm.
sideline. It's in my um, 4th phase book, the one I mentioned earlier. But at any rate, um, um, you know, there are lots of things that we never really give a whole lot of thought to, and the fact that the wine tastes different depending on what you're thinking is really a revelation, and it kind of demonstrates that what you're thinking, what you're feeling, has a big impact on your life, on many aspects of your life, and also, you know, it impacts their cooking, because if the chefs in that restaurant have negative feelings about stuff, it could be reflected in the food. You see, because the food's got water, and if the negative information comes in the water, it's possible, again, this is wild speculation, it's possible that the food will take on a flavor that's not as ideal as if love went into the preparation. So, you know, when your grandmother prepares something uh, with a lot of love for you, the grandchild, um, it makes a difference compared to, for example, when you get it at a restaurant where the chef couldn't care less.
Mhm.
So all of that has such interesting implication. There's so much that if this is all true, what I've been telling you about, this is all true. It's one of the most important revolutions in science, because water's all over the place, and we think of it as kind of inert, but it may not be inert at all.
Right. Yeah, this has been a fascinating discussion. Yeah, and I so look forward to seeing, what the future of this research and your lab's research brings. Maybe before we wrap up, I'm curious if you could give me, say, your top three, how about top three recommendations of the best ways to boost your EZ water production,
To
just
produce,
based
what,
on,
boost production of easy water? Is
or
that
to
what
increase, just to increase, yeah, the EZ water in your
the
cells.
amount of
The
easy water?
amount,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. Um,
I know we already touched on saunas and fat a bit. Anything else though that
yes,
makes a
yeah,
big difference?
there are a few. Okay, so, um, okay, one of them is connecting yourself to the earth. Now, why should that help? By I mean connecting yourself to the earth, I mean electrically. So it means walking barefoot on the beach, or connecting yourself electrically to a metal plate that's connected to a metal rod that's driven deeply into the earth. So you're electrically connected to the earth. It's been known for some years. There's a lot of research on it. It's called earthing or grounding, depending on where you come from. I started in electrical engineering, so we refer to it as grounding, but most people refer to it as earthing. You'll find it all over the internet. There have been, or all over journals too, been a lot of studies, biophysical studies, and the studies document that this stuff is good for health. And there are some theories, but nobody has really understood why. I think I understand why, and I think it has to do with easy water, building easy water, which is the question that you asked. And um, and uh, why do I think so? Because the earth is negatively charged. I don't know if you're aware of this. I was not aware until about a decade ago when a Russian colleague, as he was about to leave for home in Russia, was telling me about the earth's electric field. And I said, Andre, you must be talking about the magnetic field. He said, no, I'm talking about the electric field. I said, I never heard of an electric field, and I was educated in electrical engineering, and somebody would have told me if there's an electric field on the earth. So he said, well, it looks as though your educational system is deficient, because in Russia, everybody knows about, even middle school students know about the Earth's electric field. That is, the Earth is negative, and somewhere up there, perhaps the ionosphere is positive. So it's like a capacitor with negative charge in the Earth, on the Earth, and positive charge up there. And that gives rise to an electric field that's perpendicular to the surface of the Earth. And it's pretty strong, 100 volts per meter at the surface of the Earth. So it means the potential difference between your nose and your toes is about 200 volts if you're standing up. So it's pretty significant. So I still didn't believe it. Although the next day, one of my students hands me Feynman's lectures. This is Richard Feynman, the Nobel physicist from the last, he was, many considered him to be the Einstein of the second half of the last century. And his books, his 3-volume set of lectures that he gave at Caltech were reproduced. And one of my students comes to me and opens volume 2, chapter 9. And there it is, a whole chapter on the Earth's electric field and on the negative charge of the Earth. And in this chapter, he presents all the evidence that is really old evidence, but it's pretty clear the Earth is negatively charged, it's not neutral. So it means if you connect yourself to the negative Earth, it means you're connecting yourself to an almost infinite supply of electrons, of negative charges. And if you're deficient in negatively charged EZ water, when these electrons seep into your body, we know from experiments that if you add electrons to water, it builds EZ. See, and so what these electrons are doing are presumably the same thing. They come from the Earth. There's an almost infinite supply, and they seep their way into your body, and they build EZ water. So I think the reasons for improved health in the process of earthing has to do with electrons coming from the earth into your body, building EZ water, making you feel better. So that's one. Um, Another one is eating the right substances. It's been known for thousands of years that certain foods, certain herbs, spices are good for health. Example is turmeric, curcumin. People have known from Ayurvedic times that this is good for health, and it's good for many, many different aspects of health. And so it's not, I've got a headache, I'll take some turmeric. It's, I have a headache, and I've got a pain in this muscle or whatever. And this seems to work against many afflictions that you have. And so you might think at first that, well, maybe turmeric is something special, and it works on a multitude of different receptors inside your body that take up the turmeric and do something positive. Or another hypothesis is it has one action, and that action is felt everywhere. And so we hypothesize that that action is on water. If turmeric were to build EZ water, you take turmeric, EZ water should build in your body, and therefore you feel better, whatever the affliction might be. So we did experiments to test that. We tested, and we got positive results. Small amounts of turmeric, similar to what concentrations you might find in the body, build EZ water. And we tested right now 7 or 8 different substances that are known to be good for health, and they all build EZ water. And whereas we tested glyphosate, which is inimical to good health, at least certainly of weeds, and many people argue us as well, all it does is diminish the size of EZ water. So yeah, you asked me for other things besides sauna and sunshine, and those are 2 things that I think of offhand. The earthing is one, and certain herbs and substances that have been known for a long time to be good for health, and our evidence shows that it might be due to the buildup of EZ water. Does that
Interesting.
answer?
Yes, yeah. No, I mean I was just thinking,
Published. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, no, I was just thinking it's so interesting because, something like turmeric, you're, mentioning that it's like it's been used for so long, and people have kind of known about the benefits, but we're coming at it from so many different angles now, trying to, showing that it decreases inflammation or does this and that, and it's just, I think very interesting that easy water is just one of the number of things, and maybe one of the least recognized, at least at this point, um, effect things that is one of the ways in which these substances or practices has huge effects on human health.
I mean, I think at least hypothetically, the mechanism could lie in the buildup of EZ water. There may be other mechanisms also, but our evidence seems pretty clear.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
exciting, because how does this stuff work? Is it magic, or is it something else? Well, no, I think it's not magic at all.
Right. I think we've done a good job of explaining that. You've done a good job of
Well, thank you.
yeah. So great. So if people want to find out more about your work, or get in touch with your lab, just any resources that you would point people to?
Well, yeah, you can go to our lab website. It's got a lot of stuff on it, and it's a long URL. I don't remember it offhand, but
We can
if
post
you
a link
do a
to it.
Google search under my name, University of Washington, Gerald H. Pollack, University of Washington, bioengineering, any of those will get you to the website. And of course, I think the best place is the latest book. It's called The Fourth Phase of Water, and it's on Amazon. It's got a lot of nice reviews, and it's become really popular. So if your language is not English, you'll find it under bunch of other languages, but um, I recommend it. It's actually pretty cheap also, because we wanted to keep the price low in order that the information get disseminated. And so I recommend that because it's readable. It tells the story, or lots of stories, and got some humor in it, some cartoons, and it's designed to be readable for the non-expert. So, and the reviews talk about that also, that it's really accessible. So a lot of people have fed back positive comments, a few negative ones too, but you know how it goes.
So it goes, yeah.
So I recommend that. So the lab website and Amazon, The Fourth Phase of Water.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, if you guys want to get in touch or leave a review, please do so. YouTube, we're Roscoe's Wetsuit. Instagram, Roscoe's Wetsuit Podcast. You can also find the audio versions of the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So whatever format that you would like, go check us out. Dr. Pollack, thanks so much again for coming on the show.
Well, you know, thank you so much, Toby. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you again one of these days.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
next time
thanks.
back in
Thanks for
Seattle.
inviting me. Okay, take
Yes,
care. Okay.
absolutely. You too.